Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Fan Perspective. I am your host, Nathan Nile. And fantasy football is over this year, and I wanted to look at a few of the things that happened. One, at the tight end position, at the beginning of the year, I predicted that Rob Gronkowski would be a top 3 tight end if he wasn't number 1 overall. A lot of people said he would probably have a disappointing year compared to the record-breaking year that he had last season. But he was number 1 overall all season until he got injured. And even though he missed the last 5 games, he still finished number 3 overall, only 2 points behind Jimmy Graham and 4 points behind Tony Gonzales, who finished number 1. And at running back, Lesean McCoy, Arian Foster, and Ray Rice were expected to be the top 3 backs in fantasy football. And they were expected to be some of the top first people drafted. They were. Adrian Peterson, though, he had a monster season and finishes first in points for that position, while Arian Foster led the league in touchdowns and finished second. Doug Martin, he had a few huge games like the one against the Raiders, and that one helped him to finish 3rd overall, while Marshawn Lynch was consistently hitting 100 yards and finding the end zone and ends up finishing 4th, with Ray Rice rounding out the top 5. And there were 2 rookies, Trent Richardson and Alfred, who finished number 6 and number 7, and they were the only other 2 halfbacks to get over 200 points. And at wide receiver, after the monster year that he had last season, a lot of people, Calvin Johnson, he was a first-round draft pick in a lot of leagues. But this season, he could only find the end zone 5 times. However, he did break the record for receiving yards in a single season and finishes number 1 in points amongst receivers. Only 1 point behind him, though, was Brandon Marshall, who had a huge season after being reunited with Jay Cutler. And Dez Bryant finally showed why he was a first-round pick, as he finished the year 2nd in receiving touchdowns with 12 and 3rd in points behind receiver A.J. Green. 3rd in points by receiver. And A.J. Green improved on his rookie season as he tied for 3rd in the league with 11 receiving touchdowns and finishes 4th amongst receivers in points. Vincent Jackson had a huge year for Tampa Bay. He failed to reach 200 points but finishes 5th amongst wide receivers with 183 points. Also, I would like to point out that at the beginning of the year, I said Mike Williams would be a great sleeper this year. He barely missed out on 1,000 yards and fell just short of 10 touchdowns, but he did get more fantasy points than Steve Smith of the Panthers, Torrey Smith from the Ravens, and Miles Austin from the Cowboys. Many of those guys were top 5 picks, while Mike Williams went 8 and didn't go higher than 8th. And then, of course, the top point earners overall were all QBs. Adrian Peterson in standard leagues finished 10th overall, and the 9 players above him were all QBs. Drew Brees led the league in interceptions, but he also led in yards and touchdowns and finishes number 1 overall. Second was Tom Brady, which is aided by the fact that he finishes the year with only 8 interceptions. And Cam Newton couldn't quite match his production from last year, but he still had nearly 4,000 passing yards, and he had 8 rushing touchdowns, and he finishes 3rd overall. And 4th was Aaron Rodgers, who had been number 1 for much of the year, but his production started dipping during the stretch run, which sucks if you were fighting for a playoff spot at that time. Anyways, and RG3 finished 5th overall. He led all QBs in rushing yards and only turned the ball over a total of 7 times this season. And let's not forget the unsung heroes of some of our fantasy seasons, kickers. Stephen Gostkowski finishes number 1 overall with 162 points. Matt Bryant finished 2nd with 156, and Blair Walsh, the rookie in Minnesota, finishes 3rd with 153. And defense, well, it was something special to watch this season. Chicago kept scoring touchdowns, and despite a few very horrible games, they had so many big days that they ended up finishing number 1 overall and were the only defense with over 200 points. Second place was Seattle with 180, and rounding out the top 5 were Denver with 173, San Diego and New England each at 155. Not surprisingly, Every single defense in the top 5 had at least 13 interceptions and at least 8 fumbles recovered, at least 24 turnovers overall, and at least 5 defensive touchdowns. New England was the only defense that was the only top 5 defense that did not have a blocked punt or kick. And the Bears were, shockingly, the only top 5 team without a kickoff or a punt returned for a touchdown. I know, right? Anyways, that's it for fantasy football for 2012. I will be back next year in 2013. You'll be there with me when I do my draft. And until then, if you won, congratulations. If you didn't, hey, happens to the best of us. I'm still over 500, but this year, overall, I'm still over 500, but this year I went 0 for 3. Either way, though, looking forward to another great season next year. I'll be there with you as we start preparing for the drafts. I'll start doing I'll film my live drafts I'll record them when I'm doing them. And until then, well, tune in tomorrow for reflections from the NFL Week 17 and the playoff picture. Tune in Wednesday for reflections from the entire 2012 NFL season. Until then, I am your host, Nathan Lyle. Happy Tuesday. I'm sorry, happy Sunday, and go football!